Deputy Alan Farrell.
Apologies for that, Deputy Brown. I assumed you were next, but
No.
yeah, that's fair enough. Well, I welcome the opportunity to contribute to this debate on the aircraft noise bill. Like my colleagues around Fingal and in my constituency, I'm equally disappointed that it's taken this long to bring it to the House for debate. But nonetheless, I do welcome the opportunity to address some of the points contained within the bill. The regulation of noise at Dublin Airport, of course, is of utmost importance because there are obviously plans for the second runway, the northern runway, which will have a great impact upon a number of communities across the North County. And while factors such as innovation and aircraft development has made planes quieter, the fact remains that airport movements can create significant noise and disturbances in certain communities, which can be compounded by wind direction and other such factors. I think we would all agree that noise pollution can create disturbances for families, communities, and have major health implications. And as such, we must work to ensure that noise regulation at Dublin Airport is a priority. In terms of the proposal put forward by this bill, there are a number of concerns that exist. I've been contacted by a number of residents in my constituency, particularly in the communities of Portmarnock and St Margaret's, and I will endeavour to address a number of their concerns throughout this contribution. The bill sets out the competent authority to advise noise-related issues as they relate to Dublin Airport and planning applications, and that will be Fingal County Council. I'd like to see clarification from the Minister on what actions he will be taking to ensure the independence of this function within Fingal County Council from the planning authority aspect which it currently holds. I won't dwell too long, Ceann Comhairle, in regards to the comments of the previous speaker and indeed Deputy Ryan and others yesterday, but they certainly do ring true, and that has to be said. There is a perception in the public domain that Fingal County Council are not the appropriate authority to be appointed to fulfil this role. And while I understand that the decision was based on legal advice, and while I further understand the debate that took place at pre-legislative scrutiny, at that particular point in time I was satisfied that all had been done with regard to the legal position. But since then, in the last few months, it has become increasingly obvious to me, at least, that there were other options, that if we were going to put the level of investment into a local authority, such as this authority, I should say, such as Fingal County Council, and start from zero, but then why not start an entirely new agency? That is quite frankly the position that I hold. Fingal County Council is the body that collects rates from the airport and is the body which currently makes planning decisions as they relate to the airport. And it is therefore understandable that many local residents therefore are concerned that the implications that this will have with regard to Fingal County Council holding the function of competent authority and making decisions regarding noise levels at Dublin Airport. I do not accept that elected representatives will have no role in the decision-making function of the competent authority, but I would appreciate further information on the buffers that would be put in place between the aspects of Fingal County Council that acts as the planning authority and the section that operates as the competent authority. There must be certainty regarding the separation of personnel between the competent authority and the planning authority functions of Fingal County Council. We cannot face a situation whereby we will find it in a few months' time that personnel currently in the planning section now act as personnel within the competent authority function. We cannot face a situation, additionally, whereby the planning authority review an application in one room and the competent authority are reviewing it in the room next door. There must be real and meaningful separation of personnel between the planning authority and the competent authority within Fingal County Council, and I think anything else would be unacceptable, Minister. I do note, however, that with regard to the current permission granted for the second runway at Dublin Airport, where any action taken to amend or overturn the conditions associated with this permission, a full planning application process would ensue, whereby following the decision of Fingal County Council in this regard in both its function as competent authority and separately as the planning authority, the appeal body will remain on Board Pleanála. When the last decisions were made regarding the second runway on Board Pleanála was the appeals body, and it's vital that this remains the case, and that Fingal is not the appeals body. I think it's important in terms of ensuring that the Council is not judge, jury, and indeed executioner in this regard. And I think it's appropriate to say, Ceann Comhairle, that in the sense of the planning process is actually not radically changing in this overall process. It will still be the local planning authority, and it will still be An Bord Pleanála operating as the appeals mechanism. So there isn't that significant change, unlike some of the remarks of the previous speaker. To expand on this in regard to the development of the second runway at Dublin Airport, restrictions were put in place by An Bord Pleanála regarding the allowed number of night flights once the runway was completed. Should the DAA make a new planning application to overturn this, I would hope it is reassuring to residents that regardless of whatever decision may be reached by Fingal County Council, An Bord Pleanála will again be the appeals body, and as such I would expect that the concerns of local residents, should this instance occur, will be appropriately acknowledged by the board. I'm sure that the Minister will understand that many residents hold genuine concerns regarding Fingal County Council proposed function as the competent authority, and as such take whatever action may be necessary to provide they are not appointed to the new role associated with the competent authority functions of Fingal County Council, as otherwise this bill and the authority bestowed upon Fingal County Council will undoubtedly be undermined. As such, I wish to raise the financial cost in establishing Fingal as the competent authority. In a recent parliamentary question which the Minister responded to, it stated that it is estimated that the set-up cost establishing the competent authority under EU Regulation 599/2014 will be in the region of €350,000. It is further estimated that when the competent authority is making a regulatory determination, which is typically in 5-year cycles, the cost of peak activity will be in the region of €1 million. In years where activity is related to monitoring and reporting only, in other words, the years between each regulatory determination, the running costs will of course be less than this. And it continued that it is intended that these costs will be met by a levy by the competent authority can impose on the DAA. The DAA will be liable to pay this levy on a monthly, biannual or annual basis. And it continues. But I note that this bill allows for the Council to impose a levy on the DAA to cover its costs, either to reimburse the Council or in advance to fund its operations in this regard. The fact remains that the start-up costs must not be a burden on local residents through the divergence of their local property tax, for example, or for local small businesses through the use of their funds to pay their taxes through their rates. And I want the Minister to give assurances to the House that, albeit a small amount in the broad scheme of things, the €350,000 set-up cost is not a burden on the ratepayers of Fingal County Council, and indeed the citizens, which includes the deputies present, because it is not appropriate for the state to set up a competent authority which governs the airport movements in its international airport to be borne by 5% of the population. And that should be borne in mind as well. The simple fact is that noise mitigation must always be the priority for communities in and around the airport, and therefore that must be a priority for this government. In this regard, I wish to address the noise monitoring functions that Fingal County Council will have as competent authority. It is vital that noise monitoring happens on an ongoing basis at Dublin Airport. It is clear that noise at Dublin Airport is not only generated by flights themselves, but also by numerous other functions at the airport. The fact that these operations must be monitored continually and appropriate action taken to reduce noise levels is in the best interests of local residents. I note that the legislation before us requires the production of an annual compliance report by the competent authority. While this in itself is positive, it will be fundamentally necessary for required action to be taken by the competent authority to ensure that all operations at the airport are within the noise limits each of the 365 days within a year. It will be vital that where noise exceeds the maximum level, swift action is taken to bring the airport activities into compliance. In order to ensure compliance with the competent authority, will have the ability to seek the recourse through the High Court where its directions regarding operations measures and noise mitigation measures are not adhered to, and that is vitally important. Much of the focus here on the airport directly and the activities that occur within the airport. However, it is important that we take note of the people in their own homes into consideration in the context of this debate. We must ask ourselves the question, how can we best provide for local residents to ensure that they are protected from increased levels of noise at home, such that should a situation of non-compliance or any other such factor arise? And indeed, as Deputy Daly mentioned, and I think it was mentioned yesterday evening as well, there have been developments in regards to what is determined as acceptable noise limits in the vicinity of an airport, released by the WHO. And while I'm not suggesting that we should implement that line for line, we do need to take it into consideration. And I would argue that it is important that the competent authority would have the competency to impose the requirements of an insulation scheme for homeowners and public buildings, adopting the balanced approach. When the plans for the second runway were brought forward, it was vital that those plans were put in place to provide homes and buildings, such as schools, with additional insulation to offset any increase in noise as a result of the increased operations. And it is inevitable that Dublin Airport traffic levels will grow into the future as the airport grows itself. And the fact that this would increase on the number of communities potentially impacted by the noise levels emanating from airport operations. Additionally, it is important that communities are protected and that any remedial works required on homes and public buildings to protect them from noise are completed in advance of any increase in operations at Dublin Airport. This is why I believe that the competent authority should have the power to implement such requirements, and I would appreciate the Minister's view on that matter. The fact is, while elements of this bill are certainly positive, concerns, fairly grave ones, do exist. Local residents deserve the reassurance that they seek to have their worries adequately addressed, and certainty must be provided regarding future implications that this bill may have on our communities in Fingal. I am particularly interested to hear later, and particularly the Minister's response, as to how he believes or why he believes this proposal would constitute a good deal for my constituents and how he intends to answer their genuinely held concerns. And just two final matters, Count Corla. I do think that the development of Dublin Airport over decades has happened in a relatively well-planned manner. There are, however, interventions at local authority level which have impacted greatly upon the lives of people who live at either end of the runways. There have been a prevalence of one-off houses developed, particularly in St Margaret's, which is predominantly a rural area. And those properties were granted planning permission because they were zoned by councillors. I was a councillor myself on Fingal County Council for nearly 7 years, and I do recall quite a number of zonings occurring in the vicinity of Dublin Airport for one-off houses. And we are now dealing, in certain instances, we are now dealing with the repercussions of those decisions. You know, certainly the 2004 to 2011 development plan, which was approved prior to the granting of planning permission for this particular northern runway, all of that has to be taken into consideration. And I do think we have to have a meaningful conversation as to how the competent authority, regardless of whom is appointed, if the threats by the opposition are followed through upon, should have some sort of overview or review of the Planning and Development Act in regards to future one-off housing in the vicinity of Dublin Airport. And I do think that that is something that should be considered in the context of this bill. My colleague Deputy Daly referenced Manchester Airport and how the restrictions there were in place at night and how there were other mitigating factors that authority have introduced. And I think that certainly deserves further research. I focused my research on London, and perhaps I should have focused on Manchester, but you know, it should be said that Heathrow has a restriction of up to, I think it's 5,800 flights at night. That's per annum, so it's about 15 flights a night in certain circumstances. I find it particularly peculiar that in the context of the DAA's press release when this bill was published the other week, that we were left on no uncertain terms by Dalton Phillips that this would have a hugely detrimental effect on Dublin Airport. But the business model being operated by Dublin Airport, as quite frankly Deputy Daly covered far better, or perhaps more eloquently than I'm about to, you know, has an inherent flaw in it. It suggests there's going to be a dramatic reduction in the number of aircraft movements at Dublin Airport, and that's just not true. They're going to have 2 runways that are operating simultaneously. They're sufficiently distant so that aircraft can land and take off at the same time, as is the case in other jurisdictions and other airports. In fact, I was in an airport during the course of the summer where an aircraft was taking off simultaneously while I was in an aircraft that was taking off. So this is something that can occur. And if Dublin Airport is operating at 30 million passengers, 30 million passengers on one runway, then it stands to reason that there's a reasonable expectation that they could actually hit the target of 50 million as they are projecting in a reasonable period of time. Now, longitudinally, of course, our landing slots are slightly different than mainland Europe and the UK because we're closer to the Americas, where a lot of our aircraft are coming in at 5 and 6 in the morning. And I do accept that those aircraft disturb residents because they used to disturb me when I lived about 4 kilometres from the airport, particularly as those aircraft are slowing down upon landing. The rumbling sound, the minister wouldn't be familiar on his part of the city, but it can disturb people's sleep. And while my house was too far away to actually hear engine noise either taking off or landing, that rumbling noise is present in the North County, and you can hear it particularly at busy times. And Aer Lingus are advertising, not to pick on one airline, but Aer Lingus are advertising for 200 new pilots. They're expanding their international long-haul fleet from 14 to 30 by 2021. And that means a massive expansion of aircraft. Now, some of them are narrow-body accepted. They're smaller engines. But the fact remains that I don't accept the position adopted by Dublin Airport Authority that this will have a massive detrimental effect on activities at Dublin Airport. It will have a massive detrimental effect on their current business model. So they need to change it. Because the point of all of this is the balanced approach, aircraft noise regulation, improvements in technology even since the decision was made in 2007, which I'm sure was based upon technological assessments of engines that was probably dated in 2005. That's quite a while ago in terms of engine development. So all of that taken into consideration, Minister, I believe that the airport noise regulation 598/2014 is a very, very good thing. I think it gives citizens the opportunity to deal specifically with an organisation who are solely tasked with dealing with aircraft noise at their local airport above 50,000 aircraft movements per annum. And as the only airport in Ireland which will have this directive applied to it, it is a good thing that this bill is before us, albeit with certain concerns with regard to the separation of the operation of the authority within the 4 walls of Fingal County Council. If we were debating this bill in 2006, I don't think anybody really would have voiced major concerns, certainly not in the way that they're being voiced today. But we're not, and we are dealing with a backdrop of the ongoing and year-on threat from the DAA that once the competent authority is assigned, their intention is to appeal the 2 conditions which they find offensive with regard to night flights. And therefore that puts all of us in the predicament where we're having to deal with the appointment of a competent authority, which is a good thing, with the backdrop of the presumption on the part of many, informed of course by opposition politicians, that it is a fait accompli that the competent authority will overturn the decision of An Bord Pleanála. And with all of the technological advancements that I mentioned, and with all of the traffic patterns that Dublin Airport have built up since that decision was made in 2007, I actually don't see any evidence that the competent authority will overturn those decisions, because there hasn't been significant changes made in terms of the operation of Dublin Airport. And with the exception of African flights and flights landing from the continental United States, which can be augmented to ensure that they land after 6 a.m., I just don't accept that it is a fait accompli that the competent authority will overturn the decision made. So I do welcome this bill. I welcome the opportunity to debate it in the House at Ceann Comhairle, I am intent on supporting the bill throughout, But it should be said, there are certain amendments that I have been made aware of that I do think will require careful consideration by the Minister, and I would in particular draw his attention to the likes of the points that I've raised about installation, a mandated programme that will be operated by the airport, the competent authority, and indeed the separation of staff to ensure that there is a sufficient level of distance between the competent authorities' activities and the planning authorities' activities into the future. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.
Thank you, Deputy Farrell. Now,